Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining for this media briefing, which will focus on the Barbados Secondary Schools entrance examination results. We will be addressed by the Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honourable Santia Bradshaw, the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw, Director of Education Reform, Dr. Ida May Denny. And at this time, I will invite Minister Bradshaw to go first.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, Barbados. Today's announcement of the Barbados Secondary Schools Entrance Examination, or 11 Plus, is really a major event in our annual calendar. It essentially just signals the transition from primary to secondary school for many of our students, and it brings to an end years of hard work and support given by our teachers, principals, and even our parents to our students. Let me say at the outset that this year's press briefing to announce these results will not take the usual format. And why? Because we have learnt over the course of the past few months, in particular with the first shutdown back in March 2020, when the first case of COVID-19 was discovered in Barbados, that we have to live in a new world. And in so doing, there are many times when we're going to have to make some kind of adjustment. In so-called normal times, on this particular day, as we announce these results, our students would often be at school listening with their peers and their teachers to hear their names mentioned as being one of the top students across the island, and parents would be descending outside of the schools to receive the result slips for their children or their ward. Not only would there be much jubilation, but as you know, oftentimes there's often a lot of disappointment as well. But the truth of the matter is that today we are not in normal times. And within recent weeks, we've seen a spike in our COVID-19 cases in this country. And what has been even more disturbing is that many of the cases are now being found in children under the age of 18 years. Yesterday, we recorded about 101 positive cases, of which 26 were under the age of 18 years. On the previous day, of the 85 positives, 22 were under the age of 18 years. It is because of the high transmissibility of the Delta variant that we made a decision last week to close our schools until we could better manage the situation. Simply put, Delta is not playing, and our children are now equally at risk of becoming very sick. So today, immediately after this press briefing, the Ministry of Education will begin to email results to our students via their G Suite accounts in an effort to limit the number of persons who would normally congregate at our schools. Principals will be provided with hard copies of the results, and arrangements will be made as well at individual schools for collection if for any reason a child has not received his or her results electronically. Again, I want to urge all of you to liaise with the schools and adhere to the protocols which have been put in place. As many of you are aware, we made the decision to delay the exams from the first week in May to Wednesday, the 28th of July of this year. It was clear to us then, when we carried out the readiness assessment, that we were seeing significant learning deficits amongst our students, as many of them did not cope well in the online environment. These students would not only have been impacted in Class 3 at the start of the pandemic back in March of 2020, but they also suffered further disruption in the ensuing terms. After consultation with our Class 4 teachers and principals, it was felt that 11 additional weeks of face-to-face instruction would make a significant difference in the preparation of these students who would have been severely impacted by the pandemic. I want to take the opportunity here to extend sincere thanks to all of our Class 4 teachers with whom we engaged, who provided the necessary feedback to us to make the decisions that the Ministry of Education was able to make. And I want to salute you for your commitment to our children. This year, the Barbados Secondary Schools entrance examination was administered at 21 government secondary schools, as well as the Barbados Community College. The latter not being a traditional site, but again, because of the COVID pandemic, we've had to increase the number of locations where the test could be administered. Students from 69 public primary schools and 29 private primary schools were registered to write the examination. 3,336 students wrote the examination, as compared to 3,000 381 in 2020, and 3,379 in 2019. Of the students registered to take the examination on July 28th, 60 were unable to do so, largely for medical reasons. And this was as a result, as many of you would recall, because we had a number of outbreaks within the schools, not necessarily started in the schools, but certainly because a number of parents were impacted with the challenges of COVID. And as a consequence, we were forced to close a number of our schools, and many of those children were placed in either quarantine or isolation for a period of time. Accommodation was made, however, for those students to be assessed later using what we term as the alternate paper on the 11th of August. This year we had 47 requests for exemptions as compared to 54 in 2020, 42 in 2019. Those students have been allocated to institutions which can cater to their needs, as these are usually students who are unable to either read, at least at the level of a Class 1 pupil, or who are maybe unable to recognize numbers or to perform basic number operations. In relation to our special requests, over the past few years, we have sought to accommodate those students who for various reasons have an impairment, some form of disability, an illness, or a peculiar circumstance which may hinder their progress in the examination. In some instances, it is a request for either larger print to be provided, extra time, a reader, or a writer. And these are all things that are done recognizing that as a ministry, we must demonstrate at all times a flexibility so that no child is left behind. This year we received 102 requests on behalf of our students, and we accommodated them. Now to this year's results. Of the students who wrote this year's examination, 3,173, or 95.1% of the candidates have been allocated to public secondary schools, as compared to 94.5% in 2020 and 97.5% in 2019. Just for the record, let me say that this is quite normal, as every year several students are not allocated in the initial stage, primarily because the parents have made either too few choices or the student's immigration status has not yet been regularized. In other words, they may have been applying for student visas, the paperwork may have been started, and therefore at the time of sitting the examination, there's still some paperwork that has to come into the ministry to finalize these things. Our students are then allocated to one of the few schools which has an available space, and this year we've had to allocate some 139 students across the various schools. I'll now turn to the performance by subject, and I'll start with mathematics. This year's national mean for mathematics is 55.64. While this represents a marginal decline of 2.6 from the previous year, the truth is that our students' performance actually improved significantly from the results of the readiness assessment. And you may recall again that the readiness assessment was what we did when the students returned to face-to-face to get an idea of exactly how they were performing. And I know many people were in the early stages quite critical because they wanted us to just get the examination over and done with. But we knew that there were deficits which our children were experiencing, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to see where they were, understand what the challenges were, and then work with them to be able to make any necessary modifications in preparation for the examination. The mean when we did the national mean when we did the readiness assessment stood at 41. And the truth of the matter is that this reinforces that while this is not a perfect result this year, it does show, however, that face-to-face instruction over the 11 weeks made a major difference in the overall performance of our students. In other words, things could have been far worse if we had just returned to school and had the examination on the scheduled date. As it relates to school performance, this year's results do not differ significantly from previous years. Around 47 public schools performed below the national mean, whereas the majority of our private schools, 21, performed above the national mean. When we carried out the readiness assessment, we saw a dip in performance at both public and private schools. In other words, they were not on the same trajectory as in previous years. 15 public schools performed above the mean, and 17 private schools performed above the mean. However, the 2021 results for this year show that there has been some improvement from that assessment, with 21 public and 21 private schools performing above the national mean. What are our results showing? Our results are showing in mathematics that students demonstrate average knowledge of basic mathematical concepts, that in many cases our females continue to exhibit a higher level of understanding of mathematical concepts than their male counterparts in each of the sections of the paper. Also, that more than half of the students continue to be challenged in applying knowledge and skills to new situations. 702 or 21% scored less than 30% as compared to 650 or 25.1% in 2020. 1,256 students, or 37.6% of the students, scored between 30 and 69 as compared to 1,194 or 35.3% in 2020. 1,292 or 38.7% of the students scored between 70 and 100 marks as compared to 1,463 or 43.3% in 2020. While this year the number of students scoring 100% increased from 24 in 2020 to 37, there was an overall decline in the number of students who performed between 70 to 100. However, we saw a small increase in the number of students who scored between 30 and 69, and whereas there was a slight reduction in the number of students scoring below 30, this continues to be a cause for concern, especially given the additional loss of face-to-face time which we will experience for the upcoming term. In relation to action to be taken, I think it is clear, and we've started the process. Certainly this administration has put in place the Education Reform Unit because we've been looking obviously at a revision to the primary curriculum. We've been looking at changes to the syllabus. We've started the process of assisting our teachers with various instructional techniques to be able to cope in the online environment. And we've developed an even closer relationship with the Urdeston Teachers Training College to ensure that there's continuous training and development for all of our teachers who are involved in delivering the primary curriculum. I'm going to invite the Chief Education Officer later and the Director of Education Reform to speak to some of the changes in more detail which we've made and which will be taking place in the coming months. But as it relates to the individual performance in mathematics, we have seen this year 37 students, 17 males and 20 females, score full marks on the mathematics paper. These top students have been spread across 19 schools. There were 18 students from 10 public schools and 19 students from 9 private schools. St. Stephen's Primary, Charles F. Brooms, and St. Cyprian's Boys each had at least 4 students scoring 100%. With respect to the English examination, while no student gained full mark, one male student of the St. Stephen's Primary School gained the total of 99. The overall national mean in English for 2021 is 66.28. This represents a decline of 3.51 when compared to the national mean of 69.25 in 2020. When compared to the readiness assessment, there has been a 3.28 improvement in the performance, again reinforcing the importance of us having done that assessment so that we can actually see how our children perform then and obviously how they perform in the actual examination. As it relates to school performance, the decline in the students' overall performance in English is also seen in the number of public schools which performed above the national mean. This year, like previous years, 49 public schools performed below the national mean, whereas the majority of private schools, some 22, performed above the national mean. A similar trend was seen in English in that there was marked improvement from the results of the readiness assessment. What do these results reveal? Students demonstrate average knowledge of basic grammar, vocabulary, and comprehension concepts. And in both sections A and B, female students consistently outperformed their male counterparts during the period under review. More than half of the students continue to experience challenges in their use of English and their ability to comprehend the expository text. In 2021, 245 or 7.3% scored less than 30% as compared to 238 or 7.01% in 2020. Also, this year we had 1,303 or 39.1% of the students scoring between 30 and 69 as compared to 1,053 or 31.4% in 2020. We also had 1,788 or 53.6% of the students scoring between 70 and 100 marks as compared to 2,090 or 61.8% in 2020. In relation to the top female this year, a young lady by the name of Elena Bohane from the St. Angela's School has risen to the top in terms of her performance, and I would want to take this opportunity to congratulate her as she will be going on to the Queen's College. The top male in performance over the course of this last common entrance is Jeremiah Brown from the St. Stephen's Primary School, who would have scored 98% in Maths and 99% in English, and he will also be attending the Queen's College. I now turn attention to our early sitters. An early sitter is any student that is younger than 11 years in the year of the examination. Such students may qualify to write the examination if they satisfy the stipulated criteria, which basically is that they must score not less than 85% in both language arts and mathematics in both Class 2 and Class 3. In 2021, requests were made for 12 students to write the examination early as compared to 17 in the previous year, and 11 students would have been granted permission to write the examination early. There were 6 males and 5 females. In total, there were 10 students aged 10 and a 9-year-old female. What have those results indicated to us is that 6 students scored above 90% in both subjects. We had 8 students scoring above 90% in Maths whereas 6 scored above 90% in English only. We had 2 of the students who gained scores below the criteria of 85% in mathematics, and 5 students fell below in English. Overall, there were only 2 early sitters who fell below the criteria of 85% in both mathematics and English. And I would like to say at this point as well that the issue of the early sitting was something that I believe a lot of parents were concerned about because they had a number of students who were on a particular trajectory. We did see a few of the parents decide to defer a year to give students a further opportunity to prepare, but there were also some who I believe the schools and certainly the parents felt were ready, and therefore we accommodated wherever possible. As it relates to deferrals, a parent can request a deferral for 1 year if in the opinion of the school or in the opinion of the parent, he or she will benefit from an additional year. The student must have been consistently scoring below 20% in both mathematics and language arts or did not complete a significant portion of the syllabus. Candidates meeting the necessary criteria would be granted the deferral. And to ensure that the necessary systems are in place to address the needs of these students, I would have mandated that all requests for deferral be accompanied by a detailed program of study for the student for the next academic year. In other words, it's not a situation where students just return to the classroom and there's not a clear plan of action as it relates to how to address any of the challenges which they may have had. This year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the criteria for deferral was expanded to take into consideration factors which were induced by the pandemic. 117 requests for deferral were granted as compared to 65 in 2020. A number of the reasons why people requested the deferral included emotional issues. In some cases, the students didn't have access to a device, or there were only about 5 who indicated they didn't have connectivity. In some cases, it was the opinion of the teachers who led us to the conclusion that the students needed to be deferred for a further year. And there were about 10 students where we had requests where they had extended breaks from instruction. There were about 9 students who presented concerns in relation to social and welfare issues as well. And I share these because I think it is important for people to understand that in this particular period that we are going through, these are real issues that our students are experiencing. And the Ministry of Education has obviously tried to ensure that at every juncture that we're able to cater and even to modify in some instances the rules and the normal regulations so that we do not appear as if we are too rigid. And I'm therefore grateful to my staff for being able to assist with making that accommodation as was necessary for our students. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrust the educational system in Barbados to become heavily reliant on technological devices for the delivery of instruction. And unlike previous cohorts of students, this year's students have had to endure the greatest impact in terms of preparation for the 11+ examination. These are unprecedented times. And I want to commend all students who sat this year's examination, because many of you have persevered despite the challenges and have had to adjust to online learning and blended approaches. You've had to grapple with households that were never intended to be places of receiving instruction. You've also suffered as a result of parents not being able to find employment or even to secure employment during this period. And I therefore want that certainly as these results are issued to parents and certainly to students today, that account is taken of this when parents are either celebrating or sometimes they come down too hard on these students. Just remember that these students have gone through a lot of stress, and it really is not going to be fair to them to apply too much pressure in terms of how they may have performed in this year's examination. The national mean, which is a statistical measure used to analyze students' performance when compared over the 3-year period, showed that there was no significant difference in student performance in mathematics and English. When compared to the readiness assessment, which was done a mere 3 months before the 11+ exam, it is evident that the decision by the ministry to delay the administration of the examination has made a positive difference in the preparation of students for and for their learning gains. Teachers, students, and parents, again, I want to commend you as well. You have done a remarkable job trying to also balance all of the variables that are out there as a result of this pandemic. Our students are a unique group who at their tender age have already demonstrated their resilience. They persevered and they succeeded against the odds of this pandemic and indeed also the ashfall that had confronted us several months ago. I've already mentioned the Class 4 teachers, but again, let me say thank you to them on behalf of all Barbadians, on behalf of the over 3,000 students and the parents for their commitment and dedication in making sure that no stone was left unturned in the preparation of our students for this examination. The results speak for themselves. I also want to thank the former Chief Education Officer, Mrs. Joy Adamson, who would have held the ship throughout one of the most difficult periods in education. And I look forward to her continuing to work with us in a different capacity in the coming months. As it relates to the burning issue of transfers, I want to take the opportunity again this year to remind parents to bear in mind that it's a different environment. Obviously, we are not going to be able to have parents coming down to the ministry, filling out forms to be able to make cases for students to be transferred. We have facilitated instead by having a form on the ministry's website where parents can indeed submit the information as to the reason for the transfer and to request consideration be given. Let me reiterate that it is not a done deal once you submit the request for the transfer, because the truth is it depends on obviously spaces and availability at various institutions. And therefore, I would want that parents take into account over the course of the next few days a number of videos that we're going to be releasing on what is really happening at a number of our secondary schools. Because I believe sometimes people make decisions in terms of where to send a child or which school is good for a particular child, not necessarily based on the subjects that are taking place at that particular institution or the focus of that particular institution, but obviously on other factors that sometimes help to influence decision making. And so over the course of the next few days, we're going to be giving an insight into some of the subject areas, the areas of specialty at a number of our secondary schools across the island, so that you get the opportunity to ask yourselves whether or not you can allow your child to go to the school where it has passed for, because the truth is the child may actually excel or have an interest in a particular area. It therefore means that as we start to get ready to do a number of the reforms in education, these are the kinds of conversations that we're going to have with the country. It also means that as we start to change the way in which instruction is delivered, but also change our curriculum, we have to make it more relevant to our children. The one thing this pandemic has taught us is that we cannot anymore just get our children ready for an examination. And the only reason that we were pushing to have this examination completed in the last year is simply because we had no other form of assessment up until that point. Otherwise, as the Prime Minister has said, and as I have said previously, our intention was to move away from the common entrance examination. That said, as it relates to the course of the next few months, let me just say that work has started in relation to the Director of Education Reform and our Education Reform Unit to move in the direction away from the common entrance examination. It's not going to be an overnight process, and the truth of the matter is that we wanted to start the engagement with the public several months ago. But as all of you no doubt are aware, COVID has changed the way in which we can engage, and we have had as a country and certainly as a ministry to focus on a number of other things. It does not mean that we have not started to look at specialist schools and centers of excellence, and Dr. Denny I know can speak to those in greater detail a bit later. It doesn't mean that we have not started to revise aspects of the curriculum. We have started to look at things like the history curriculum. There's a team that is working even on the music curriculum as well, and other aspects of the curriculum are being addressed. It does mean that we are looking at financial literacy and other subjects that are of interest to our young people and that help to prepare them for the world of work. It also means that things like robotics and coding, where we've expended significant sums to be able to give exposure not to a handful of children, but to children across the entire system, that those things are going to become commonplace as we move forward in education. Last year, we embarked, because of the issue of transitioning to online, we had no choice but to ensure that students were able to access devices. And the truth of the matter is that we've recognized that technology really is going to become more and more commonplace across our schools. We started to upgrade our schools so that we're in a position to ensure fence-to-fence connectivity at various parts of the school plant, so that when we get to the point where we can go back into the school premises, that we're in a position to allow for those students who can work in the school to be able to get online. And equally, if students are at home, that teachers may be able to utilize the premises so that they can also teach. And all of these changes, the electrical upgrades and all of the fence-to-fence connectivity are being done to prepare ourselves for a life post-COVID. It does not mean that we have stopped doing what we have to do in order to make the transition from the 11 plus or to make the transition and the reforms that are necessary in education. But we have had to basically take a step back and to put a number of things in place to support our teachers, to support our principals, to support our students in order to help us to make the necessary transition. We provided, and when I looked at the figures this morning, I was actually pleasantly surprised. We've provided over 16,000 devices to students, both in terms of the government of Barbados contributing close to 10,000 and the remainder coming from the private sector. And we've given the commitment that especially as we enter the online environment over the course of the next few weeks and the start of this term, certainly, that it is our intention to continue to provide the support for students who do not have devices. And I've heard a lot of people say, yes, they're frustrated about going back into the online environment, but the mechanisms are there, whether through the schools, whether through your teachers or principals, or even directly through the Ministry of Education, to let us know whether a child does not still have a device. Because where we have become aware of the students who didn't have the devices, our ministry has had to try to work with the student support services to identify and to provide those devices for our various students. I therefore want to also make it clear that going forward, we're going to have a multifaceted approach to teaching and learning, and also continuous assessment is going to have to become the order of the day, as we would have seen with the readiness assessment, giving us an idea at each stage where exactly our children are at. At this point, I want to perhaps call on the Chief Education Officer as well to give a perspective in terms of plans for the upcoming term, and then later for Dr. Ida Mae Denny, the Director of Education Reform, to be able to again outlay the plans as it relates to the upcoming reforms in education. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Minister. Dr. Archer Bradshaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, Barbados. There is an African proverb that states, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I want to take this opportunity to congratulate all principals, teachers, students, and parents for the work that they have done over the past year and the work that they will continue to do as we face this COVID-19 pandemic. Within our education system, it cannot be business as usual. We have to make a special effort to ensure that our children's needs are met. With that, when we begin the term this September, we encourage all teachers to perform diagnostic assessments for their children. We are accustomed to employing assessment of learning practices. I encourage you even more to employ assessment for learning. It will not only be about teaching the content, but we will focus on teaching the student, ensuring that the student understands. We understand also that the teachers cannot just teach in a vacuum, or they just can't teach with the information that they have collected in the 2 weeks. As such, the Ministry of Education will provide pertinent information on each child to the secondary schools. We will do this by means of student profiles. We will also send reports to the secondary schools so that teachers can have a better understanding of the deficits of our children. We advise them also, along with the principals, to place the students into groups that they can adequately address all deficits. As I said before, it's about ensuring that we teach our students. Yes, we'll teach the content, but we want to ensure that whatever we do is meaningful and relevant. With regard to the curriculum content, we also understand that we cannot teach the entire syllabus for each term as we had done in the past. As a result, the officers at the Ministry of Education are currently reviewing the syllabuses, and they are identifying those topics and those concepts that are germane to students' functioning. This information will be shared with principals and teachers by the ending of the week. In addition to that, we recognize that remediation is extremely important. There are some students who we know are struggling with certain concepts. They're struggling with application of the concepts. And when we consider Bloom's taxonomical levels, we understand that there are some who, when it comes to evaluation and creation, are struggling in that area as well. I encourage teachers and parents, because I said earlier we must do it together, to work to see how we can assist these students. As the minister said earlier, the assessment that we will use will be multifaceted. We'll be using authentic assessment. We'll be using continuous formative assessment. We'll be using various types of assessment, and note I said assessments and not only tests. Because when we think of assessment, we often think about tests, but we will be utilizing instruments such as portfolios, reflection journals, etc., so that we can get a full understanding of where our students are. In addition to that, we understand that the mental health and wellness of our children is extremely important. And this past year and some has been extremely difficult for some of our students. And we recognize that with the online learning, that is a major concern. To this end, the Ministry of Education has established a mental health and wellness committee, and they are well on the way as it relates to identifying activities for students. Among these activities, we will have student support groups. We will also have a student hotline that students can call in if they need to call in and share, and many other plans which will be shared as the time progresses. In addition to mental health and wellness, we must also remember physical health. And we understand the studies have shown that with online teaching and learning, we adopt somewhat of a sedentary lifestyle, where we sit for long hours in front of the screen. We have been meeting with members of the PAHO and also other organizations to discuss how we can address this particular issue. The education officer at the Ministry of Education, Mrs. Phillips-Boyce, she has already outlined a plan of action moving forward to get our students active. One of them, I recall, is called the Macarena moment, where students at a particular point in time will stand, stretch, exercise, just get the body moving. I always say that if we have students who can learn very well and they're not physically active, then we are what they call spinning top in mud. So we have to ensure that our children are physically active also. As it relates to special education, much work was done by the teachers in that department over the year, and they plan to continue in that regard. As we speak, they're organizing sessions and workshops to help each other with materials and resources that can assist those students with special needs. They're also developing a community of practice where they can share these same materials and resources. As I speak about the students, one of the things that we want to revive moving forward is the students' councils. It is extremely important for the Ministry of Education that our students have a voice. We need to hear the issues that are affecting them so that we are able to adequately address them. And I am sure that with the help of the Director of Education Reform, Dr. Ida Mae Denny, we can put some plans in place to ensure that our students are heard, because after all, the education is for them. In addition to catering to the students, we also want to cater to the principals and teachers. Continuous training is high on the chart for us. We want to provide those opportunities to all teachers through the Erdiston Teachers Training College and also through the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. From January this year, teachers have been accessing a number of workshops in digital technologies, and we plan to continue this. In addition to this, we are also exploring linkages with a university in Finland called Tampere University, and they too, through the IDB, will be providing training for our teachers in digital pedagogy. As it relates to educational leaders, we recognize too that leaders need refresher courses. Having said that, Urdiston Teachers Training College will offer workshops for principals. I must say that there were workshops offered during the summer, this summer 2021, and they were quite successful. We will continue on that trajectory and offer workshops to educational leaders. Of course, we will be looking at topics such as industrial relations. We'll be looking at the use of technology. We will also be looking at how to manage stress. Any workshop that can assist the leaders and teachers during this time. I spoke about mental health and wellness as I spoke about the students, but we also must ensure that our teachers and our principals are mentally fit to carry out their tasks. As such, the Mental Health and Wellness Committee is also organizing a number of activities for teachers and for principals. With any implementation, and for any implementation to be effective, monitoring, evaluation, and support are of high import. We plan to continue to observe our classes, and when we observe the classes across the educational landscape in Barbados, we are observing the classes with the express aim of providing support to our teachers and to our students. Nothing else. Providing support to our teachers and to our students. If our mandate is indeed quality education, it means that the support has to be there, and we will be taking that very seriously moving forward. We also ask for the cooperation of the principals and the teachers in this regard. Another important pillar in education is the parents. We recognize that during this time, especially in the online environment, children spend a lot of time at home, or by granny, or by auntie, or by some family member. So we need to ensure that the environment is one that gives the support also. We are looking at strengthening parent-teachers associations. So if you're not a member of a parent-teachers association, I'm asking you as a parent or auntie or granny, to join that organization, that association, because through it all, we want to be able to communicate with you as a group. And I can tell you that the Ministry of Education has lots of plans concerning building the Parent Teachers Association and communicating with you even more effectively. We have also considered parent support programs. With the establishment of the Parent Teachers Associations and strong Parent Teachers Associations, I encourage the association to invite persons from various organizations to come in. For example, we have the Barbados Association of Reading, and I know that they willingly go out and they perform workshops for parents and teachers. You can take advantage of that kind of facility as well. Barbados moving forward. The Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training plans to communicate with you through all forms. We want to hear you. We want your input. We want to hear from the principals associations. We want to hear from the teachers unions. We want to hear from the parent teachers associations. We want to hear from corporate Barbados as well, and all members of the public. As I started by saying, if we want to go far, we have to go together. And I believe, even though the pandemic is rough, even though the pandemic brings change that we've never seen of this type before, we can make it together and we can go extremely far. So at this time, I will end on that note and turn over to Dr. Denny, who will shed some light on the structure of the schools, etc.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Barbados. The Chief would have set out a number of things that we intend to focus on in the upcoming school year. She made the point of saying that it cannot be business as usual. And one of the reasons why it cannot be business as usual is that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a number of things home to us. And one is that if we are going to continue to develop the economy of Barbados, we are going to have to diversify our economy. And to diversify the economy is something that we have to start at the level of the school. And therefore, curriculum reform is going to be a critical plank of what we do as we seek to reform and transform education in Barbados. A couple of weeks ago, we had our secondary principals meet with the new executive director of the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation, who was talking to them about the development of new growth areas for the Barbados economy and what the schools can do to play a role in the development of those new growth areas. The principals were exceedingly enthusiastic about it, and I believe that as we go forward and we strike up that alignment with the BIDC, we are going to see a number of very important changes and additions to our curricula, especially at the secondary level. Changes that are going to help our children to become more engaged. Part of the reason that we have disciplinary problems in schools right now is that a lot of our children are not engaged. The things that are happening in schools may not necessarily be of interest to them. But when we introduce some of these new growth areas, I am convinced our children are going to become more engaged and we are going to see children showing much more interest in school. So that is a critical plank of our reform efforts. Now, we have already developed a draft framework for the new structure of the system. I know most people would have heard the government say that we are looking to get rid of the common entrance. We are looking at development of a new structure that takes the interests and the needs of all of our students into consideration. And I know Barbados is wondering what is happening in that regard. So we have developed a draft framework, which we are discussing internally now, and which we intend to bring to our stakeholders very, very shortly. Our stakeholders being our schools, our principals and our teachers, and then the general public. And once we have had feedback from these consultations, then we are going to make some final decisions which we will communicate to Barbados during the course of the upcoming year, so that you are aware of how we plan to pursue the change in the structure of the system. We also recognize that with the spikes that we have had in the pandemic in recent times, obviously, as the minister has said, we are going back to online education. And obviously, we need to make sure that our teachers are competent to deliver in the online environment. In the past year, one of the things the ministry has done is that we have done some monitoring to see what is happening with the delivery of instruction. And we have come across some teachers who have been doing very well at it, but we've also come across some teachers who have been struggling. And therefore, one of the things that we are going to do, that we have started to do in the reform process, is the development of an electronic education framework that is going to focus on a lot of the training that the chief would have told you about. Because as you know, we have the saying, practice makes perfect. The more our teachers practice using delivering instruction through the online modality, through the electronic modality, the better they're going to become at it. So therefore, we are developing this framework which is going to set out the stages that teachers will have to go through in terms of receiving instruction for their own delivery of instruction, so that they can become better at it. We are going to use teachers who we recognize are good at what they're doing. And I don't have to tell you, the younger teachers are the ones who are more au fait with what to do. And we have noted a number of them who have been delivering instruction in very interesting ways. And we are going to use them to help us to deliver to their colleagues. So there are a number of things that we are planning to do in terms of changing the system, changing the paradigm, making sure that we can plug the gaps, that we can address the deficiencies that have happened and the learning loss that has happened in the last year. And we hope that during the course of the year, we will be able to come back to you and tell you where we are and seek your support in terms of ensuring that we can provide for the education of our children and the further development of Barbados as we change the paradigm that is happening now, so that our children can indeed lead the Barbados of the future. Thank you. Minister?
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny. As we open now for questions, I'll just invite members of the media to identify themselves and the media house they represent before posing their questions. Are there any questions? Wendy? Mic is muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
I have a question firstly for the Education Minister, Ms. Bradshaw. I did not hear you mention what the national mean for the English was. I just want to know exactly where it was at. I heard the math, but I don't remember what you stated the English as being.
Thanks, Wendy. The overall national mean in English for 2021 is 66.28.
And how does that compare?
There's actually been a decline of about 3.51 when compared to the mean of 69.25 in 2020. But the truth is there's been an improvement from when we did the readiness assessment. So if we take that as a snapshot of where the children were, while they're not where they need to be, the truth is that there has been an increase in obviously their performance as a result of the face-to-face.
Okay, because last night on my program, we were discussing the issue of literacy and where our children are at. And I'm just wondering, I heard what Dr. Bradshaw said in terms of some of the things we're going to institute, but I just want to know how much wider that platform is going to be in terms of getting our literacy levels up.
Yes, Wendy, I can take that question. The Urdiston Teachers Training College is on the cusp of launching its Literacy Diagnostic Center. The main objective of the center is to assist those students within the system who are struggling readers. So it will go beyond training the teachers in literacy and diagnostic assessment. We will also be conducting assessments for students as well across the system.
Thank you kindly.
Next question.
You're welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Akil Levels, Starcom Network. My question is, the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union has suggested that incoming students spend about 2 years in first form to address the learning deficits caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, a lower first. What is the ministry's thoughts on that suggestion?
I don't think that it was the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union who made the suggestion. Actually, I think the last time the minister, the then acting chief, and I sat here, I made the point that one of the plans that we were putting to the secondary principals is that they might have to institute lower first forms in order to deal with some of the deficits that the children came to them experiencing. So the ministry is fully in support of it because it is a suggestion that came from the ministry at the outset. And we are not saying that all schools should do this. But we are saying that when those secondary schools get the list of children who have been assigned to them in the coming days, that they need to look at both the item analysis, the content analysis, and the performance of the students that have been assigned to them and make decisions as to whether they will need to institute lower first. There are some who will definitely have to do it. There are others who may be able to get by without doing it. But we are fully in support of it. Thank you.
Akil, did you have a follow-up? Akil? I'm not hearing Akil. Next question.
Hi,
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just seeking clarity. Could you give me the spelling of the top girl's name and then the breakdown of the percentages that she got?
We'll get that information for you.
To say, as I'm looking for it, we will be issuing to the press a summary of the key points discussed here today, just to make it a little bit easier, as well as the names of all of the students that we've mentioned. The young lady's name, this battery just died. Go ahead, take it. I'm going to ask the chief to take it, because as technology would have it, the battery just died on the computer. Yeah, O'Shea. O'Shea? No, the other young lady from St. Angela's. Yeah,
Okay.
St. Angela's.
So the top girl, her name is Elena, E-L-E-N-A, Bohene, B-O-H-N-E. Is that all the information that you require?
The breakdown of what percentage she got in math and English that was given?
I have here the raw score. I can tell you that she had a raw score of 100, converted score 122.81. I can give that information to you at the end of the press conference.
Yeah, like I said before, the information
great,
will
thank
be
you.
shared. I think just to reiterate the point that we, normally we would list out every single child and the scores of the top students. I don't think this period is one where we need to necessarily do that. And given the environment we're operating in, that's why we've undertaken as a ministry to send those results directly to the students, so parents can open the emails as well. Where they can't attend or receive it, they can go directly to the schools. But we're just trying to cut down the number of persons attending at the various institutions today and over the course of tomorrow as well.
Wendy?
Yes, I have another question. And this relates to the issues that some teachers have been reported having at the secondary level with how the children behave and interact online. And I am just wondering if maybe to try to bring about some greater discipline and to make them feel like they're more in a classroom setting, if maybe perhaps any consideration was given to mandating that they do wear school uniform online, or perhaps a t-shirt with the school's crest or insignia on it, just to give that uniformity. Because having quite a few friends and relatives teaching, they have complained about how the children come online, how it may distract others, etc. So I'm just wondering, in terms of trying to give them a bit more focus, since it's already a domain they're struggling in, if maybe perhaps lending some sorts of discipline, even if it is in terms of dress, might not aid in helping to create a more cohesive environment.
Wendy, let me just put this in a context. Children behave sometimes badly at school and they're in school uniforms. Wearing a school uniform is not going to suddenly make sure that children come online, turn on their cameras and behave better. What we really need is a call to our parents and our guardians to make sure that they understand that the dynamics have now changed, that children are operating in an environment where, the teachers are not there to provide the oversight necessarily over them, and they have a responsibility to ensure that their children sign on. They have a responsibility to behave themselves when the children are online. This is not about a school uniform. This is really about parental guidance being given to children so that they understand that whether school is in a physical form or it is in an online form, that they have a responsibility to make sure that their children are learning in whatever environment it is. So I don't necessarily agree that it is a case of wearing a uniform and that's going to make the change. This is really a call more so for parents to stand up and be accounted for in terms of making sure that their children are doing the right thing.
Next question. Are there any further questions?
This last one from me is with regard to Miss Denny and the work she was speaking of that she's been doing along with the various individuals in the ministry. Can you give us some, perhaps maybe rough time frame that it might take to complete this work before we can have some idea or estimation of what we're looking to do outside of the traditional common entrance?
Thank you, Wendy. It is difficult to say we are going to complete it by X time because there are a number of things that we have to put in place, and we must have those consultations. And we must consider the feedback that we get from the consultations. But one of the things that we are going to do, that we are committed to doing, is making sure that as we go along, we keep you informed. So I may not be able to tell you right now that we are going to have a final program for you by the end of September or by the end of October, but I can commit to telling you that at the end of September we can tell you where we are and how much more we have to go. So we are making a commitment to keeping the public informed as we go along.
Minister Bradshaw, do you have any closing comments at this time?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. I think, we started out on this journey of wanting to make these changes in education so that we could transform the way in which people view education in terms of, or even the engagement of children at various schools. And, we never expected that there was going to be a COVID-19 pandemic. Even sometimes when I hear the questions about how long it will take for the reform process to take place, the truth of the matter is we may be in this situation with COVID-19 for longer than expected. Some people are predicting 2024. So we have to make the modifications now in our small ways and our medium ways to be able to make that transition for a post-COVID period. We haven't stopped focusing on the transformation, and I want to make that abundantly clear. All of us are agreed that we need to phase out the common entrance. What we have to do, as we said from the outset, is we want to engage in conversations with the general public about that process, about what the changes will look like. But it does not mean that, as the Chief has said and the Director of Education Reform has said, that we don't put in place all of the necessary measures to improve our schools, to make our school curriculum relevant to our students, to make sure that we equip our teachers with these skill sets to be able to transform from the pedagogical side into the use of technology. It does not mean that we stop doing any of these things because everything is hinging on the removal of the common entrance examination. Everything is still happening, and all of these things are moving parts that will bring us closer to that final day in a sense of judgment as it relates to the common entrance examination. But I want to leave you by pretty much reminding people that, while we talk about the common entrance today, why I've changed the format of this discussion about the exam today is because, quite simply, it is not just the students who sat an examination, the 11 plus, that have deficits and who are going to have challenges going into school. It is all of our students. So if we did readiness assessments on all of the students, we're going to find deficits in terms of their ability to be able to comprehend some of the basic concepts. As we go into September 20th and we start the term online, it is clear that we're going to have challenges. But I want to appeal to parents, I want to appeal to students, I want to appeal to the general public. We have not walked this road before. But what we do understand is that while it is difficult, there are simple things that we can do to support our students and simple things we can do to support our teachers and our principals as well. And those are the things that I am begging you to dig deeper. Instead of complaining sometimes, let us see how we can support the child that doesn't have a device. Let us see how we make the social services aware of the children who have challenges. Let us see how we can be our brothers and our sisters' keepers. It is not a straightforward exercise right now as we approach this next term. We don't know when we are going to be able to return fully face-to-face. But I assure you that so long as we can get back to school in a phased way, that is the priority of this ministry. And we've demonstrated that once we can do phased reopening or a blended approach, that will always be our priority. So it may be a little rough over the next few weeks, but I will encourage all parents to try to get their children vaccinated, and all parents and adults in this country to be vaccinated. It is our only hope of being able to reach a certain level in terms of our herd immunity, so that we are able to even consider the phased return to school. So the government can do little more at this point. We've got all the vaccines. Fortunately, we're seeing the uptake from some of the students in our society. Parents are taking the students, but we need more. And we can't wait until we are midway into the term to start to vaccinate. The sooner that you vaccinate our children, the sooner we're able to climb out of this and to make our way back into a phased approach to the school term. So again, I thank you. Again, congratulations to all students who have worked tirelessly to get to this point, and to all who support, certainly in my ministry as well, the exam team, all of the invigilators, CXC, everyone who has made this examination this year possible. And I hope that you will be able to receive the results over the course of the next few hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honorable Santia Bradshaw. Let me also thank the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw, the Director of Education Reform, Dr. Ida May Denny, members of the media. Good afternoon.